Everyone, welcome to Freaking Brilliant, yeah? My name is Richard Sargent. I will be the moderator for this evening. I work at Project 15, and I also run the online marketing Fresno group here in the Bitwise building. And so if you're interested in marketing, come see me afterwards. This is a really cool night. I mean, Freaking Brilliant's back. I remember going to my first Freaking Brilliant back in 2014 when I was a part of Bitwise. And we were in the Mural District in this lobby. And there's probably about the same amount of people here, but in a smaller lobby about the size of all this front seats in the boxes. And we were there for 90 minutes just listening and dreaming like, what are the stuff can happen in Fresno? So when you have topics and discussions like this and we're bringing this stuff to Fresno to help educate our community, these are pretty powerful moments. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to have the panelists here. So we'd first like to thank our sponsors for this evening, Chevron, Bitwise, ABC30, More Than SEO, Meza Films, Borba Farms, Kings River Conservation District, and Pacifica Pizza. Was that food good? Did you guys like it? Ooh, those wings, I tell you. And also, let's give a special thanks to 59 Days of Code for putting on this event, yeah? After this panel, we will have some networking and some questions that you can ask about the event or some different things. After this panel, probably in the lobby and in here. So that will be really cool. Our next event will be the kickoff party for 59 Days of Code. And that's on June 17th at 9 p.m. till midnight. At midnight, the actual competition will start. So if you're thinking about sleeping, please sleep before 9 p.m. on June 17th, because you're not going to sleep for 59 days after that. And that will be in the hashtag building, which is just a block that way. And we can find out more information. In fact, for more information about this, please go to 59daysofcode.org or find them on Facebook for more information. Or you can ask some of the board members. Raise your hand if you're a board member and you're here for 59 Days of Code. Give it up for the board members first off for putting this on. So speaking about questions, let's go into this panel, right? Our goal for tonight is to help inform you about water for the Ignite competition. So we will have a portion where you can ask questions about different things about your project and how it can relate to Ignite and water. Tonight we have Sarge Green. Sarge Green is from the California Water Institute Center for Irrigation Technology at California State University of Fresno. We have Martin Corrine, who's engineering manager at Cornerstone Structural Engineering Group. And we have Blake Josephine of Bakeman Water. And then we will also be joined shortly by Ted Grantham, is an assistant cooperative extension specialist and adjunct professor of University of California, Berkeley. Let's give him a round of applause for being here. So let's go around to the panelists and basically talk about what you do and your expertise when it comes to water or agriculture. Whoever would like to start.
Okay.
Go for it.
Is this on? I wouldn't say I'm an expert in water or technology, really. I work as an accountant. But I went to school and I didn't really have any technology classes, nothing too advanced per se, but when I came back to Fresno, I moved back home after college. I started working in the family business as an accountant. And I started seeing the way a lot of businesses work and how a lot of them are still technologically behind. Mm-hmm. And so I tried working to the best of my ability with the data that was at the business and starting to figure out, how the data was helping the business and any solutions I could figure out to help the business run more efficiently and incorporate more data and in any place possible use more technology. So just with a general understanding and an appetite for problem solving, that's where I just started figuring out it. The businesses are behind and they need technological innovation whenever possible. I started working with a water company, Bakeman Water Company, a couple years ago to start doing that same thing that I was doing in the accounting practice for a small water utility. And I could see right away that there were a lot of similarities, some of the same problems, just needing more data, more relationships, with that data, and better use of that data.
Yeah, perfect, awesome. We're gonna get to definitely some data questions for you.
Okay.
I'm Sarge Green, and I've been at Fresno State now for about 10 years. I retired once. You can see I've got a little snow on the roof. So I started out working on projects and reports for universities. So I've got a number of things that I've written out there. I'm in a couple of books and work on special reports for people. But a couple of the main things that I do include working at the WET Center, which is our business incubator and our hydraulics laboratory. If you've never been there, you need to schedule some time someday, and you can see some of the tech that we're already using to help with measurement and testing of water equipment. And we have the incubator to bring in tech companies to help out in the water industry. And we have what we call TIE, which is a technical innovation evaluation process. And we use a number of experts, both on the campus and outside, to come in, and people come in with their technology, and we review it to make sure that it's practical, doable, and affordable for people here in the San Joaquin Valley. For example, today, this is one I'm going to use one of the first tech things, talk a little bit about electrodialysis. Does everybody understand what that is? If you've ever had a kidney problem and you've had to go to the medical facilities for dialysis, it cleans up your blood of things that don't agree with your system. Well, it can also be used to separate water from salt. And new technology is coming along that substantially reduces our ability to separate salt and water, because while we do have a water supply problem, in some cases we have a water quality problem. We can expand our water supply if we can treat some of the waters that have a little bit of salt in them. I'm not talking necessarily ocean desalination. I'm talking underground water right here in the San Joaquin Valley. So if you can put a plant right on the spot and treat the water right there, you can create your own water, whether it's for a home, a community, or for a farm. But heretofore, it's been way too expensive, way too expensive. One of the other things I do then, I work with outside organizations. We're currently working with the Public Policy Institute of California in San Francisco. They're a very well-known third-party, independent public policy organization, and they've added a water policy center, and we're working on a report on the future of the San Joaquin Valley's water, because we have had some changes that I'll talk about a little later. One of them is called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and we've had problems transporting water from the north to the south. A lot of our water starts up in Northern California. We try to get it through the Delta and help our users down here in the valley. So another thing I do is I work with the Valley Partnership. The San Joaquin Valley Partnership is all 8 counties working together on common problems, and water has risen to #1. My expertise, I have a degree in water science. I've been in the water industry for over 40 years. My first job was with the Water Quality Control Board. And when I was with that organization, it's the regulatory organization that tries to manage water quality to the best of everybody's ability. And I worked things from Superfund sites to agricultural drainage water to even Kesterson Reservoir and the Kettleman Hills Waste Disposal Site. I wrote the permits for those, for that facility. That's where we get rid of the nasty stuff we have no place else to put. It's just buried in a tomb out in the Kettleman Hills. And then I do work with the university quite a bit in terms of, I don't have a teaching capability, but I do a lot of guest lectures on almost all the departments. So the other parts of my expertise was, I was the manager of an irrigation district. So I dealt with agricultural water supply and drinking water for a small community. So between water quality, water supply, and now at the university, I've had a very enriched career that's been lengthened because of the problems with water.
And so my name, Martin Kareen. You might be asking, why is an engineering manager with a structural engineering group on a water panel? That's a recent change for me, kind of reverting back to an old discipline. But I have over 43 years in business, and since 1991, the last 26 years as a consultant. A good part of it as a consultant in the municipal water space, working on water, wastewater, storm drainage, reclaimed water, recycled water. I've done some very large recycled water plans and planning water programs and water resources. In 2009, I accepted a position for the city of Fresno as the Assistant Director of Public Utilities over the Water Division. Recognize that the city of Fresno, in a world that's known for not having much water, the city of Fresno actually had an abundant resource. and had the resources, that capability to actually subsidize the cost of water here. The problem is that it hasn't been funded correctly or adequately for 50 years. It's not unlike anywhere else. Kind of living off the investments of the past, and then developers building what's new, but really not taking care of what was old. And so worked for, let's see, for 6 years, working through a water program here. The water program was actually a sustainable water program. It was why I was recruited to come here. So we're building now a new 80 MGD water plant out there that was part of the plan. We're building 2 water pipelines to bring water from the Kings River and the San Joaquin to our 2 water plants. While I was there, we instituted a AMR, so automatic meter reading or infrastructure. It's not fully AMI, and the reason it's not AMI was because before I came, the city of Fresno opted to only do one-way communications. Everybody that's doing it now is doing two-way communications, because now you can go, they're coming up with valves that you can operate on the meters and a lot of other things that you can do remotely. Unfortunately, that capability doesn't exist right now in the system. Secondarily, one of the things that was a problem in the city of Fresno was they developed the system to get the data. They were kind of forced to do it by an agreement with the Bureau. Unfortunately, what they didn't do, and one of the things that we were pushing for and they are now finally doing, was they didn't implement a system to handle and manage all of the data. So they get tons and tons of data that comes into a center, the read center, but then they didn't have the ability to actually take that data and turn it into actionable data, not very easily. You really had to go through a lot of work. So experience there. Later I moved, and so I managed the water resources, or oversaw the management of the water resources for the city of Fresno. Later went up to the Bay Area, worked for a city in the Bay Area that was a north of Delta contractor, and had several different water agreements and water resources. So became very familiar with the North water resource contracts and the variety of those. And so I have a long background, over 26 years, in water resources, municipal infrastructure, and all the different forms of water infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you. So you can see we definitely have the talent up here on the panel stage. But so this is an open question. What are the major issues that you see when it comes to water that can be solved by technology?
Well, as is true with any other business, there's always a way, or something that can be developed, because with technology and software, anything's possible. Both of the other panelists were talking about data collection, and there's more and more new technology coming out to get better reads on data. There's SCADA systems that are out there able to remotely control water infrastructure, and getting a handle on some of all this new data that's coming in that can be that can be measured to a very precise degree. Using it in meaningful ways, getting that data to interact with other data in the right way to develop smart relationships, insight into better ways to conserve, for example. It's just getting a handle on all that's already capable with the measurement. And that's a big part of what's possible on the software side, is incorporating that data together as a whole.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, I'm going to give you a little heads up on one of the problems with water over the years, is that actually water in some cases has been an early adopter of some technologies. But one of the problems is when you become an early adopter, you end up sometimes with what they call stranded assets. In other words, you've spent all your money and you'd empty your gun on the first round, you don't have any bullets left. So it takes a long time for you to gather up enough money again to adopt the next and newest round of technology. In the meantime, several rounds of technology have left you behind. And SCADA is a good example, by the way. A lot of it, when it was originally put in, was proprietary. It was not open source. And so now a lot more things have gone open source. The second thing is that water quite often is data rich but information poor. That just example was what Martin talked about, the inability to take the data from what was collected from the meters in the city and turn it into good information for the customers. And yet water is right now also very much in the center of the democratization of data and information, and it is going to become very transparent to the public. But there are parts of the water community that will resist that to some degree, and I have to be honest, one of those areas are farmers. They're so inundated right now with both the opportunity to gather data and then the inability to convert it into information they can quickly use because they're inundated with so much, and the fact that they don't have the margins in some cases to make the investment. Anybody who can come up with any way of doing things cheaper, better, faster for them is going to help them move quicker into the data and information management business and become better at it. The big guys are always the ones that catch on the quickest, and let me tell you, they're using drones, they're using moisture sensors, they're using every bit of the technology that's out there right now, and they have a number of people who can work on these kinds of things. So it's the medium to small guys who are really lagging in the agricultural sector. So a farmer out there right now, there are some of them that are still irrigating their peaches with furrow systems. Now, that's okay because one of the benefits of that is they're recharging the groundwater on sandy soils, and that's what peaches like. They like open soils. They don't like their feet to get wet because you'll kill the tree when you knock the oxygen out by over-irrigating. So there are a lot of crops out there, though, that are getting a lot more attention to optimize the growth. So they're looking at things in the root zone like the nitrogen, the water, all the chemical species that necessary to make good plant growth. All of that data is now starting to be gathered by farmers and in their farming techniques, and it's not being converted good into good information. So that's one of the things I would say. So the other big thing is that what's going to happen as a result of some of the other new legislation we're facing us is everybody's going to be on a budget. For the first time ever, with the addition of groundwater management and future groundwater controls, people will have to live on a water budget, which will force them further into technology to make sure that they don't oversubscribe any of their water sources and cause themselves pain, or to create a water quality problem, for example, by putting on too much nitrogen and having it go down into the underground water and causing problem for other people's drinking water. So ag in particular is on the cusp of a lot of needs in terms of apps, information, and the ability to manage to optimize their returns. Because if they don't stay in business, we won't have the diversity of food that we've had and enjoyed in this valley for a long, long time.
Thank you.
I'll put a couple of things. First of all, I'd say that even municipalities are late in terms of adopting, modern technology to manage their information and turn it into actionable information. Like, the city of Fresno had information and they used it for billing. That's what they thought. We're going to collect the meter data, and what's meter data for? Meter data is for billing. But meter data has a lot of other uses. And there's not just meter data, but you could also gather information from inside the distribution system. So there's new technology that's being developed and put out into the system. And it's one of the things we're looking at, because when you start using surface water and groundwater together, you have to be able to, sense the quality of water and where it's shifting. Because when you change the kind of water people are drinking, even though they both may meet state standards, people can sense the difference in taste. And that change in taste makes them think there's something wrong with the water, when there's not really. It's just a different source. So there's a lot of information that can be done, and it needs to become actionable. And one thing I will say in terms of getting data and the problem with it, and whether it's ag or on the municipal side, it's context. And one of the things we talked about earlier before we got here was the water space is extremely complicated. And for us to try and explain it to you even in an hour is literally just about impossible. Luckily, you have a lot of resources you can go to in the question book if you want to, and that includes people who aren't in the competition. There's a lot of information in the 59 Days of Code resource book. What I'll tell you is that because it's so complicated, it's very easy for people to take data, information out of context and create misinformation. And since it's hard for the public to know what's right and what's true and what's not, it creates a problem. And one example, and I was sharing it earlier with Richard, was read an article. It was put out by a local water group, represented mainly the ag side. And what they were saying was, they mentioned all these cities that were raising rates. And then as they mentioned raising the rates, but is this what, that they asked the question, but is this money going to fix our infrastructure? They said, of course not, because all this bond money, and they mentioned, billions of dollars of bond money that wasn't being spent. Well, if you read that, what you think is, oh, these guys are collecting money on the rates and they're not spending it, they're just hoarding it and banking it. Well, no, because most cities aren't collecting enough money to pay for the system and the service that they have. No one wants to raise rates. The bond money is state money. It's federal money. It's money that's allocated for a particular project, and it can only go for that project. So the rates are being collected by the municipality or the city. They don't have access to the bond money, just like the bond market doesn't have access to their rate money. And so they made this false connection, and in making it, they create distrust for the municipal organization that's managing it. So it's creating good data and creating it in a context that informs the public, because I think that's absolutely necessary, but informs them in a way, in a manner that they can, whether it's through graphics or something else that makes it so that they understand, because there is so much misinformation, misunderstanding, and opinions about everything. And I've heard some of the silliest ideas, spouted out as, hey, by the way, we should do this. And you're like, yeah, that'd take 30 years of environmental work. You'd never get the money, and you probably can't get the property that you wanted to do that particular thing with. And so it really is difficult and complicated and takes a lot to understand.
I'll give another example that Martin's talking about. A lot of people would say, well, why don't we have the cities go on to desalination plants, all of them, the cities on the coast? Well, if you add up all the molecules of water that it requires to serve our major urban centers from San Diego to San Francisco on the coast, somebody did a calculation. You'd have to have a desal plant every mile along the entire coast of California just to meet the current needs of drinking water in California.
And you don't have the electricity.
And you wouldn't have an electricity because they'd eat it all up in trying to treat that much water. So water is ripe for improvement and being able to gather data and turn it into information.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. So you definitely see the struggles that are here with water and some of the different important things. So start formulating what solutions you want to solve with this. A note of clarification really quick. So in 59 Days of Code, there's actually two sides of the competition. We still have our classic competition that 59 Days of Code has always been, which is kind of like build the coolest thing possible. And there's two sides of it. Build it from scratch, so you can't start it yet. No cheaters. Or it's already existing code. And then so tonight's focused on the Ignite portion, which is the water side, which is, if I'm correct, there's a scratch from scratch and then already existing. And for the classic side, there will be some other events coming up in the near future, June and July. So in regards to this competition, right, there's two main points that they'll be judged on. Make something relevant and useful for their customers, and create software that makes life easier for people. So the question is, what results do you hope to see with this Ignite competition, with the solutions that they come up with?
Well, I think they were both mentioning the lack of information being put out to the public, and that's very important. The water is very complicated. I'm still trying to get a handle on it myself, and there's so much information coming into water utilities and all the reporting that need to be done to stay in compliance, and then a little tiny portion of that gets put out to the public. Water is something that is easily taken for granted, and before I even started working with the water company, I didn't even think twice. You turn on the faucet and water's there. There's a ton of work that goes into making that water be there. Well, I think providing information, whether it be in the quality reports of the water, is helpful to the public. There's a lot of behind the scenes things that don't necessarily impact the public directly. The public may have great ideas about, we could have a desal plan and solve all of our problems. They don't necessarily understand all the stuff going on. They can do research and look into it and say, okay, it's not going to work out to do that. But what I really see as being the most beneficial to customers in the end is enabling the providers to more easily do their jobs. While it's good to again, while it's good to have information available to actual end users, it's going to ultimately be savings from the water management side, the water utilities doing their jobs more efficiently, not having to spend as much money, that is going to greatly impact the customers in the long run. That's where you can have more savings, pass on the savings to ratepayers, have more money for infrastructure improvements, more investment in the technology. As Sarge was saying, there's a lot of early adopters of new technology. Anytime a water utility, for instance, has some extra money and maybe they have they can afford to spend some money, they might say, oh, let's invest in this and this new technology, and then maybe 5 years later it's obsolete, or it wasn't open source, or whatever the issue was.
Yeah.
But to be able to continue staying at it, to try to find out what is going to work in the long run, what solutions there could be that are ultimately going to lead to lowering rates and saving customers money. That's what I see as being the biggest benefit to water as a whole from software.
Yeah, perfect.
There are three pieces to the water pie, and I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you about one of them that's very, very important today. And it's probably the space that has the most opportunity for innovation. And we're talking even not just apps, but sensors, so writing code for sensors. I think there's a lot of new technology that's come forth in agriculture, and it's really the pace and amount and pulling it all together, whether it's a chemistry on a chip that's down in the soil or whatever. It's figuring out who's got the best and least expensive, and getting the farmers to adopt and have the information available. The same in the municipal space. The third space is the environment, and it's probably the furthest behind in terms of tech, and we need it. We need to keep the environment in a condition that will continue to support the amount of water that humans and the environment need, both. And let me give you kind of an example. We still don't know enough about fish migration, especially salmon in California, about how much water they need, when, where they're going, who's after them, how long they have to stay in one place. We're starting to learn a lot. But I was in a meeting yesterday, and one of the concepts that this involves is called in-stream flows. And the scientists have all been working separately on coming up with the right assessment procedures and then the information necessary to understand what each stream needs to meet the environmental needs of that particular area. So whether it's a mountain stream, a cold water stream, a foothill area, on the valley floor, they were all working on independently on different methods. They finally got together. Berkeley and the Southern California Water Research Program found out that they were actually working on the same thing and actually have an assessment procedure that's very complementary and work together better. So we finally may have an actual model that we can figure out to use to assess streams and figure out what their in-stream flows might be, so that we can have more success in our environmental goals, fish and terrestrial animals and things as well. So the environment is one area where anything that anybody can do to help with technology, to help that understand the systems better so that they can be integrated in holistically with all the other water management concepts that we have to deal with, whether it's delivering water to people for drinking or for farms. That is really a big area that needs a lot of help.
I'll throw two things out there, two ideas, and one of them just came as as Sarge was talking. So the first thing is, I'll say that I've been long championing the reporting of accurate financial data similar to what would be required from any corporation. And so let me give you an example. When I went to work for the city of Fresno, I asked them what are the I was a business person, so when I went to work for them, the first thing I did was I asked the business questions I would ask. So one of the first questions I asked was, what is the value of your assets? And they said $1 billion. Well, I said, I've been doing this for over 30 years. I can rule of thumb and pretty much guess what the value of all this stuff is. I said, you have more than $1 billion worth of stuff. It wasn't until I went to go through the rate plan and they suggested that we do 0.25% rate increase to fix old pipe. And then I went, 0.25%, you don't even understand what 0.25% means. By the way, percentages are an irrelevant number. You have to know what it's a percentage of to know whether or not it's anything. And when you talk about 0.25% rate increase, it really is nominal. So what it made me do is it made me go back and say, well, what's the current value of their assets? The current value of the city of Fresno's water system alone, not including the new stuff about the $1 billion or $750 million worth of stuff that we're building, but their current assets at that time was $2.5 billion. They were underestimating it by 2.5. And it was 35% aged. So out of the $2.5 billion, there's about $800 million worth of stuff that needed to be replaced then. And their budget at the time, operational budget, was $45 million a year. So the liability that existed in their water system was almost 20 times their total revenue. No city knows that. So I was speaking in front of a group of 200 financial managers for cities and municipalities throughout the state of California. And I asked them, I said, I want to start out my presentation by asking you a question. How many of you believe you have an accurate accounting of the current liabilities of your underground infrastructure? 4 of them raised their hand. 3 of them are wrong. So, the city, that liability, that's $800 million worth of liability. That's $800 million of liability against the real property value of the city. Because, by the way, if the water system fails, like it or not, the property owners end up footing the bill for it. Either that or they abandon their property value. So I think that one of the important areas in terms of municipality is actual reporting like they would in a business where they actually have a balance sheet and they have to show what their liabilities are and what their assets are and the depreciation of those assets. And that has to be out in the public. Because how do you set rates? How do you communicate rates if the people in the community don't know exactly what they're facing in terms of the value or the liability against their real property? The second thing I'd say is, Sarge, it's interesting. I saw a project a long time ago where they were trying to, map tornadoes, and they couldn't figure out how to do it because tornadoes basically tear up everything. And so this one research group, all of a sudden they invented these small little micro sensors, and they put them in a thing and they put them out in the middle, and the tornado ran over them, picked the micro sensors up, and they all went up through the tornado, and they actually they mapped the tornado. They mapped the wind velocities, they mapped the vortexes, everything inside this. And I don't see why something like that couldn't be used in some ways in stream flows, where you'd have to come up with the right kind of sensors and how that you could manage them. And they're not going to want you to have more plastic floating out in the ocean. That's an issue. So you got to figure out a way to pick that stuff up. But it sure would be interesting if you were able to release sensors for example, into the Sacramento River and send those out through the bay and map actually where those go and see how that flow actually works, and if that was bringing back water quality data and temperature data and salinity data and all this other information, you really could get a really good idea of what was going on, and then use that to determine where there might be different types of species and whatever. So
It's worse than that. One of the most important things in terms of biology in a stream is the food supply, okay? And the food supply for the higher organisms is usually bugs living on the bottom of the stream. And you know how they find out where the bugs are? They still wade out there with a looking glass and they count them in little grids. That's how far behind we are in terms of technology. There's got to be a better way. We've got all kinds of other particle counters right now, even in the municipal business. So when you treat wastewater and you send it through a pipe, it can actually look at with light going through it. It can see particles. It can compare them to a computer and tell you what kind of particle it might be. If it's a virus particle, it shuts the whole system down and it gets the recycled water going back to the headworks. If it's just a small little grain of mineral matter, it lets it keep on going. And we have nothing like that in the environmental field. So the disparity in some parts of water world in terms of either technology or apps and data management is amazing, because we got some great sophistication in some respects, and yet others are just in the dark ages. So that's part of the research problem you're going to have to figure out is, well, where do I go to find out about what are these needs out there? I can't tell you all of them. I just know that they're out there.
I can tell you that fish don't pay very well, though.
No, fish don't.
Just saying. That's why. That's why we're behind.
Nice. So we have a couple questions, and you guys have already hit on some of the questions that we have for you. But the best part is we have one question each that you guys haven't hit on. And if you can clarify a little bit more on that. Blake, we'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit more about your experience in developing water tech?
Developing water tech. Much of what I'm doing now is just trying to learn how water works still. These guys...
Come and see me.
Okay. There's so many different aspects of it that I would never have even thought of. The constant testing that's going on, the monitoring, surveying of the infrastructure, the reporting requirements, just seeing how the office functions, how things work. In any way I can, try to figure out, well, this person does this, with this current method. How can I get a tablet in their hands while they're doing it? And some of the solutions can be some of the easiest things, but it's stuff that is just hard to get, just to push through. It's really hard, I found, since I've started working in my family business and now with water. It just in general, it's hard to get people to change the way they do things. People don't, they say, well, this works, why would I use this? So finding the right mix of solutions or the right bit of information and ease of use that can just go that extra step to get them to say, oh, okay, this is easy, or this makes my job a little bit easier, just a little bit, just enough so that they can actually start to utilize that solution. It's been hard just learning how things work with water and all the complexities of it, and then trying to find those solutions along the way. But from what I've seen, there's a ton of information out there, and there's certainly endless possibilities with what you could do with all the data that's being collected. But just starting to get some of the smaller issues addressed, just that little extra step. Like there's one tiny little job that I can make just a little bit easier by getting someone to use a tablet or use a smartphone or do something a little bit more technological. Mm-hmm. Get that user to use the technology, which is going to capture more data, is going to capture their usage of whatever solution you can come up with. Figuring out those tiny little things along the way to work towards the big solutions. We're going to do these major things with the data. Well, again, all these big solutions aren't going to do much if you can't get them to take that extra step to start to change the way they do things.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying right now is that we're not going to solve that problem, maybe not in 59 days, but you might solve a tiny problem that can lead to something bigger.
Yeah, I think getting your foot in the door is huge. Just an example, my dad was very anti-smartphone for a long time, and now I can't get him to put it down. So just teaching him one little thing. He says, Blake, how do I do this? Oh, it's easy. You just do this right here. Slow it down for him a little bit, but he's now that he's adopted it, now that he's started to use his own phone, I'm amazed with what he does with it now.
Is he now teaching you how to use it?
Yeah, sometimes.
Is he gaming?
No, not quite gaming yet.
Awesome. Sarge, we have a question for you.
Okay.
So you touched briefly on this can you explain a little bit more about Sigma and how it affects the agriculture and the growers?
Right. I mentioned Sigma in a couple of times already. and that's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And what's happened is, over the years, groundwater has depleted almost every year in the southern San Joaquin Valley. Whether we have had flood years of local water supplies, dry years, whatever, or the imported water. Even when we had imported water, despite the fact that we brought that water in from the north, our groundwater has continuously dropped over the last 40 years, just a straight curve, straight down. And that was recognized even more so during the drought, when some of the margins of the San Joaquin Valley literally dried up. In fact, some of the, even other parts of the valley, shallow wells in particular at rural homes, dried up because the water levels have been drawn down underneath the bottom of their well. So when that hit Sacramento, I think that there were people that were waiting for this event to happen. It immediately mobilized the legislature to develop a new law. Heretofore, groundwater management was voluntary. There have been some previous laws that said, thou shalt try and manage the groundwater to the best of your ability. Now it's mandatory. And you have to form a local agency to do it, or the state is going to come in and do it for you. And what it means is now we have to understand the groundwater so much better that we can actually allocate it fair share to people. In some cases where it's drawn down so far, some people aren't going to be very happy when they found out what their remaining fair share is. So they're going to be looking for somebody to help them recharge the groundwater. And the interesting thing about geology and soils is that the best areas for sinking water into the ground on the east side, but there's some very large wells out on the west side that are very deep, and they can't help themselves by putting any water in the ground. There's too many clay layers for it to get down where they're withdrawing their water. So SGMA is going to do a number of things. Number one, some people are going to be harmed. It's been estimated that we have overdrawn so much water that to get into balance, we may end up retiring as much as 500,000 acres of farmland in the San Joaquin Valley. And that's a lot. That's a lot of jobs. That's a lot of people, a lot of farmers. Now, how are they going to make it? My guess is that they'll marshal the water that they do have and put it on the crops that give us the most return. So crops that don't make as much money are going to fall by the wayside. We may end up with more nuts, quite frankly. But all kinds of nuts. Yeah. So yeah, SGMA is game changer, because it also then forces us to understand surface water as well, because they're inextricably wound. And that's what I mentioned earlier on. It's going to force us to do water budgets all over the state. It's going to affect Southern California because they import a lot of their water from the north, from the Colorado River, and from the east side of the Sierras. And so everybody now, especially areas that have been critically overdrafted, they call it, which is the ones that have really had a steep drop, they are up first. They have to have a plan on how they're going to try and get to sustainable amounts of extraction. By 2020, they have to have the plan, and then there's a 20-year time frame to meet that goal. 20 years in the water business is nothing. We've been extracting since the development of the deep well turbine in 1913 or something, when Worthington and others developed it for the oil business, and then it was transferred to the irrigated agriculture business. So we've done a lot of extraction over time, and the time is up. So it's going to be a very troubling time for a lot of people. Fortunately for us right here in Fresno, we have some of the best surface water from the Kings River. Number one rights holder on the Kings is Fresno Irrigation District. So the groundwater conditions right around here, and because of investments that people like Martin convinced the city to do, we're not in that bad a shape. So don't worry about you having to be allocated water. It's further out to the west, quite frankly, in the central and western part of the valley, up and down the spine of the entire valley. There's some areas out there that are going to have some serious problems. So Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is very active right now. We'll have a web page up here locally very soon about this particular area in the next couple of weeks, called the North Kings Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And I encourage you to get into that web page and look around, and it'll show you what we have to do. And there's going to be measurement, and there's going to be monitoring for both levels and quality. So it's bringing a whole bunch more data into this picture so that we can do water budgets correctly.
Yeah. And when it comes to Sigma, when does that come into play? Is that next year?
Next month, you have to be an agency. If you aren't, the state can come in the end of June. And if you don't have your plan done by 2020, the state can come in and take over your groundwater. And then if your plan fails in any way within that 20-year time frame, you're not meeting your own objectives, the state can come in and take over your groundwater and tell people how much they can pump.
Yeah. So that's a pretty important issue right there. Thank you. All right, Martin, you ready? You've covered a lot of the questions. So you talked about the fiscal management and the responsibilities that cities have with water management and the actual reporting. Is any of that open source, or is that kind of still proprietary? Or
You're asking whether the information, the financial information is available publicly?
Mm-hmm.
Municipalities, their information is available publicly. The issue is it's the information that they don't know. For example, when they said they owned $1 billion worth of assets, what they were really telling me was, hey, we paid $1 billion for this stuff. Well, yeah, but when you're managing a business, you don't care what you paid for it. Mm-hmm. You care what the cost of it or the value of it today. And most importantly, what does it cost to replace that infrastructure as it's aged? I frequently, when I'm talking about this, ask people, how many people own a house? All these people raise their hand. How many of you have money in the bank to replace your roof? Not very many people. And that's the thing. It's you own this asset, but very few people put money in the bank. And it makes sense when you're talking about a city, because a city, you own $2.5 billion worth of stuff, and it depreciates over 70 years. Well, you're not going to put that much money in the bank every year. But what you need to do is financially be in a position where you have a program, an asset management program, to replace that over time in a way that doesn't create bumps, ups and downs. So cities that grew really fast. So Fresno's old, and that's why it has a lot of stuff that's old. The downtown, a lot of old pipes. Fig Garden, some of these different areas that are older, they have old pipes that need to be replaced. A lot of the county islands, they were way under designed when they were the county islands. They got brought into the city water system, and when they did, they were never upgraded to city standards. So now they have to be upgraded and replaced. And we did a lot of that when I was here. So the issue really is putting into context what they don't know. It's the information that they don't really have a handle on. Now I will say that in Fresno we've worked on that, and we put some things in place that are starting to assess what all their assets are and what is the replacement cost of those and what needs to be done in terms of replacing them over time. So we've implemented a lot of technology stuff here in Fresno to start managing that information in a more responsible way. But that's Fresno. Most cities right now have no idea what their liability is or how they're going to manage it. And I think that's really the financial information that's not being reported. They report on their rates, they report on how much money comes in, they report on how much money they spent, mm-hmm. they report on how much money every employee makes. A lot of things that I think in some ways are confusing to people. And they don't report on things that really need to be understood in terms of how do I set rates, how do I create if you're going to be sustainable, sustainable has a financial aspect to it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the issues is not really addressed. Is sustainability requires financial viability, and not just for now, but long term.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to offer something. Water is boring. You're hearing a lot of boring stuff. In fact, my wife tells me that I don't have blood in my veins anymore. It's nothing but water. But having said that, gamers, if you could come up with some games that show the value of water and what happens if you don't have it, would be extremely valuable in terms of informing the public about its importance. We can't live without it. You can go for weeks without food, but you can't go more than 3 days without water. So knowing and understanding that, and it's some of the crazy stuff that you heard tonight, at a very minimum, if you can help communicate the importance, because we're not creating any more water in California, and the population is going to grow. Agriculture continues to need food, and we need to sustain the environment, so there's competition for it. And the competition is going to get stiffer. The price is going to go up for everybody. It's not ever going to go down again. So communicating about water through games would be a very valuable tool.
And I don't think you're going to create a Call of Duty about water.
No.
So,
Well, if you,
sorry.
if you don't,
but-
can't drink it,
challenge
you could
someone.
die.
But what I will say is this, you know how we became an environmentally sensitive culture, and we are way more environmentally sensitive than we were 20 years ago, was really we started out with, young people like the young man right here in the front row who hasn't put that pad down the whole time since he's been here.
I hope he's
so
playing a game that has water in it.
I see
So-
it has water.
my point is that in schools where now a lot of them have they have iPads and other things that are available to the students in the class, coming up with something that a program that does educate kids about this, the water cycle, about how you get municipal water, the different ways it comes and whatever, it would go a long ways towards raising up a generation that can understand some of the complexities that right now are very difficult to grasp because there's not enough background information
Do
or
we have
time.
any Fresno State students in the audience here tonight?
Fresno
That-
State, raise your hand. Go Dogs.
Anybody? Good.
I s-
That is one
No
of the
dogs?
themes that all new students come in are exposed to now in Fresno State. Water is a theme on the campus, and every college and most departments have an assigned water person. And every year they've done a book to the entire campus, the incoming freshmen, on something about water. One was The Big Thirst by Fishman. The latest one was a poet who talked about the sensory aspects of water. Whether it's taking a shower or swimming in a river or whatever it is, how we're all attracted to water as a sensory thing. It's an extremely interesting aspect of water. But anyway, so water has penetrated, at least at Fresno State, because we know how important it is here in the San Joaquin Valley.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's jump into some questions from the audience. Since I have the mic first, I'll start really quick. I know it's a little cheating. So you mentioned, Sarge, you mentioned the TIE program. Is that available in July or August?
It's an on-call basis, but
On-call.
what I could do is if we have some that pop up, and for example, I think we've got a company called Evoqua coming in. They're one of the electrodialysis companies that want to bring their technology was developed jointly between the Agriculture University in the Netherlands, which is their ag is all underwater very easily, Wageningen, and MIT. And it's an improved version of electrodialysis that I mentioned earlier. And they're coming out with that technology in a few weeks. So I would have to give you a calendar so that if people wanted to come in and hear. And what we do is, I'll tell you, there is a lot of snake oil in the water business as well. And I think some of you understand what that means. There are people that are selling things to people out there that have absolutely no value whatsoever. One that bothers me crazy, and if any of you are selling this stuff, I'm terribly sorry, but as a scientist, it drives me nuts. Magnets on pipes. They do nothing to the water. It's crazy, and yet they're selling them like hotcakes, even to the ag guys, because they've convinced them somehow that it made the water penetrate better into the soil with no science. If you Google it, and you'll see the science in the internet, it'll tell you the best scientists in the world have never found it of any value, and yet people are selling them all over the place, all over the world.
Salespeople, I tell you.
So TIE we sort those things out.
All right, let's jump in. We have time for about 2 to 3 more questions. So I'll come right here. And then if you have questions, raise your hand. I feel like a game show host, by the way. Come on down.
Yeah.
If you can give us your name and then the question. It's a hot mic, so.
Okay. My name is Homer Green. Talking about storage, what's your opinion on a new dam, you say it on Temperance Flat? That would give us a lot more water. Who knows if it will get built, especially with Republicans. But anyway, I'd like to get your opinion on that.
Well, we'll both speak on this, and I'll speak. We talked about this earlier, Sarge and I did. And when I was here in Fresno and working in the water resource community, I was kind of making the argument. I was working on the California water plan, the water plan update, the 2013. Sarge worked on that as well. And one of the things I was telling him was that you don't need to build a dam. I mean, yeah, dam for storage and water usage is important. But the real reason that you really need a dam, what I explained, was that you're in a chaos period. A chaos period means that, yeah, I'm not going to go into that. Never mind. I'm just going to say that you're in a chaos period. And what that means is you can have the mother of all droughts one year, and the next year you can have the mother of all rain years. We were going through the mother of all droughts, and what I was warning them was, your fear should be that we get the mother of all rain years. Well, this year we got it. We have 200% of the snowpack. You don't have the ability to store that in this system. There's just not enough dam. That dam turns over 6 times in a normal year. And so if that 200% snowpack got a warm spring rain and heats up quickly and rains fall on it and it washes down, you don't have the dam. You're going to be spending the money you could have been spending on a dam, replacing Firebaugh, Dos Palos, Tranquility, and all of the damage that's done to all those properties. So you're spending money that you could have spent building a dam to protect those properties, replacing what already exists. So one of the things I'll say is that they talk about it always in terms of storing water for use. And I'll tell you that no matter what, even if we get more water, we'll use more water. The more efficient we become, the more stuff we do. So you can't conserve or store your way to balance. We have some very hard decisions to make. We just don't want to face them about what we can and cannot do. There's just not enough. I think there is enough water. We're just trying to do too many things with the water that exists. But for that, yeah, it should be built for storage, but it should be built for flood control.
Okay, Homer, I believe I've met you before. You farm in part of the western part of Fresno, don't you? No. You don't farm?
You never met him.
Okay. I got you confused with somebody else. Okay, let me tell you this. The organization that's sponsoring Temperance Flat is 5 counties that formed a joint powers authority, okay? And they hired a manager, okay? And he's helping shepherd the project through the current process that's involving bond money that Martin talked about. He came to President Castro and said, we need somebody from Fresno State to participate in the technical evaluation. That's me. But I'm not going to express an opinion about it, okay? I'm going to tell you what I know about what it does. Martin laid it out very clearly already. Friant is too small to catch the significant events. And wherever you are on the climate change piece, one thing is for sure is that we're probably going to get more rainfall in the future and less snow. And if those storm events, and they're predicting, believe it or not, the same amount of rainfall, even with warming, if that all falls on the low end, it's going to overwhelm that dam. And that's one of the reasons why Martin's talking about it being major flood capacity. Because if that facility is built, it's up above, by itself, it'll hold, here's some water geek numbers, 1.2 million acre feet. 1 acre foot is 325,850 gallons. 1 football field, 12 inches deep, is 1 acre foot. So that upper reservoir then has that. And then, besides that, you can have Millerton still in play. It just decreases it a little bit in size. So you then have the opportunity to meter the water more carefully out when you do get it in a flash up above. So there's some benefits that have been identified along those. The second benefit is groundwater recharge. To replace our underground water, I mentioned already, you can only do it in certain places. And it's like trying to shove it down a pipe on the sandy soils. And if you try to shove it on too fast, you're just going to flood those people out. So if you have more storage, you can hold it back longer and meter it out and get it onto the ground. That will let it leak down in because it's relatively a small area compared to the whole valley, and meter it and get it in. Number 3, believe it or not, they've already done the modeling and the calculations. You cannot count any existing environmental benefits for the application for the bond money. All those are already discounted. You can't double count them. But the modelers have run Temperance Flat, and they can actually add more riparian habitat and more capability to support the salmon runs because you'll have cold water up in the deep reservoir, and you can carefully get that out somehow. You can help with the salmon runs that are going to try to be restored. And Chris is here, and he's probably going to disagree with me, but that's okay. Way the data is coming out so far, so there's 3 benefits that we've identified. 2 of them are public benefits, and even groundwater recharge gets quite a few points in the application process, and they're building the application for it right now for the bond money. The state has offered, and it's only for the public benefits, and the application is due on August 14th. So there's some professional people working like crazy as we speak right now, and it has to compete against other projects up and down the state for that little pot of money, because it won't build it. It'll just get a good start on it, and we'll need additional help to actually get it done if, in fact, it firms up to be feasible and beneficial.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to do 2 more quick questions, and then we'll conclude the panel.
Just to follow up on that about Temperance Flat, I've heard there was a study done on how much the water will cost for that water that coming from Temperance Flat, and I think it indicated that it will be so expensive that only the water districts in Southern California can afford it. So even us in the Central Valley won't even benefit from it. Is this true?
It depends on the way you do the calculations, okay? And that's what is going on right now. And what they're talking about is there is historically been a very specific way that the federal government counts the benefits. And they do it on what's known as the yield. How much extra water on an annual basis will the project actually develop? And by building Temperance Flat, the original calculations by the consultants and the people at Bureau of Reclamation said it'll only add 200,000 acre feet per year on an annual basis. And if you divide that amount of water into the cost of the project, it comes up with water that is too expensive for most people in the valley. But, here's the big but, when they start integrating that project and that water with other existing projects, including Pine Flat and the reservoir over in Los Banos, where we can serve water to some people and they can hold it longer over there. We can run when Temperance Flat is still filling because it's a little behind us, and we can meet some demands. And then when they're done, we can help people out. Whatever those combinations are, they're starting to figure out that you spread that around enough and it starts to drive the cost of each acre foot a lot lower. So it's the way things have been calculated in the past, and just like technology and everything else, financial analysis on how to calculate the benefits of a project have changed dramatically, and they're now starting to use these newer methods, and it's exactly what's in the prescription from the state to be able to apply for the money from the state. So all this stuff has to be calculated for them so they can weigh the project. So it's not something that we're trying to do to make the project look better. It's required by the state.
And I'll add this to it. In 2013, some ag guys paid $350 an acre foot, and everybody thought they were insane for $350 an acre foot of water. And then in 2014, they were willing to pay $1,500 an acre foot, and they couldn't get it. So it's just like any other commodity. We don't want to call it a commodity, but it is a commodity. There's a price for it, and it's a market and whatever. So it's a commodity. No matter what anybody says, it's a commodity. And when the commodity gets short, and people need it and people want it, all manner of people find a way to afford it. Because, by the way, you can do without a lot of things. You can't really do without water. And so thinking ahead and planning ahead, and that's why we made the investments we did in Fresno, thinking ahead and planning ahead, recognizing that water was going to become this big an issue, and that we had the ability here in Fresno to fix things so that we would be less impacted than other areas because of our water rights. We made a sensible investment, and we're continuing to make that investment in Fresno. They are continuing to make that investment in Fresno. But people will find money to pay what they need to pay when you're talking about water. It's just how it's going to be. So yeah, right now probably even if you didn't do the new calculation and you use the old method, yeah, it's San Diego, it's Met, it's LA, it's Bay Area prices for water. But people you'd be surprised what people are willing to pay when it's the last drop of water.
Yeah. Thank you. Here's our last question.
Okay, this is my name's Larry, and I have a two-part question. So I understand water is an issue, and there's multiple issues being dealt at one time, and all of this is being talked about on an organizational level. So how would me as a developer or as an average person use any information or develop around this? Because we don't have access to measure like water levels in the river, and we don't have like technologies to like separate water to filter it? And also, part two is you mentioned that you guys have a lot of data that you guys can't decipher yourself. So is this data accessible by the public? And how would we use that data ourselves to make a better
Why
app?
don't you help them out, because that's exactly what you're struggling with.
Okay. So there already exists solutions out there. Martin's talked a lot about financial responsibility. There's accounting programs out there that can help businesses deal with their finances. Managing all the assets out in the field, map-based solutions. There exists those solutions already. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of, but Esri is you can do a ton with Esri. It's endless.
GIS.
Yeah, GIS, Esri, the possibilities are endless. And even Sarge was talking about people out there using drones, and there's all sorts of technology out there that can be utilized. It's all expensive. One thing that I find, that's telling about the market and the possibilities of what could still be implemented is the majority of water provided in the state of California alone is handled by like maybe 10 or so big companies. Those are the big metropolitan areas. They're providing a majority of the water, but still there is quite a large number of smaller utilities that provide still a good sized percentage of the remaining market out there. So with some of these smaller utilities, you have the ability to offer solutions that are much more affordable. So you could take something that you see like Esri, where it's a map-based solution where you can plot out all your assets in the field, or any type of financial software that's dealing with business management, or there's also software out there that can be more expensive dealing with metering and just tracking customers' usage. Very just general business type applications. Again, the larger providers are able to afford all these things and implement them, but I still see a large demand for the smaller utilities and the more ubiquitous applications, for instance, like web-based, anything utilizing Google Maps in particular. The Google Maps API is something I think could be really helpful in the future. Again, the solutions can be simple, and
I got a suggestion for you. That should be your assignment, is to
I-
help with the organization strategy. If you could develop a survey that could get it out into the water communities, whether it's urban, agricultural, or environmental, and find out what it is that they're struggling with through that survey, and then find out what applications or what activities are already out there. I'll give you a perfect example. Last year, because of the drought, the prior year, I should say, there were people who were losing their pets in some storage reservoirs because something called harmful algal blooms, okay? They make a poison that's lethal to dogs. The dogs go out, lick the water, and they drop dead right next to the lake. And these things occurred because the weather was warm, the lakes were low, and it's just a species of material that just has this particular problem. It turns out that they've been killing it on the East Coast for years with ultrasonics. And nobody here out on the West Coast knew that. I've talked to some of the highest people in the state, and they had no idea that there's already been cost-effective treatments. It targets this little organism, and it won't lyse the cell, it won't break it open. It just dies, settles to the bottom, other bugs eat it, and the poison doesn't get out. Okay, so that would be the assignment, is find out by setting up some kind of a program that can survey everybody and find out what these gaps are. If somebody could do that and everybody else could tear off of that, figuring out what they found out from who's asking for what technology or what needs, you'll be able to satisfy everybody in this room for a long time.
So Sarge, I was in the Bay Area, so you weren't talking to me because I actually used it in Vallejo on our lake.
Well, I'm sorry.
But
I didn't know that at State Board.
I have a question for you. Are you asking that in terms of you as a consumer? Or are you asking that in terms of you as a researcher, how you find data?
Well, I'm asking in terms as me as a developer, because
A software
I need-
developer, coder.
Yes, a coder. So a coder depends heavily on data that
Yeah.
we can use, and that's something that should already be translated by the organization itself, or
Right.
give us access to it so we can decipher it ourselves. But you also mentioned that it's really complicated. It's not just straightforward, the answer. So how can we use any information if there's no information to be used?
That's what I thought. That's what I thought you were asking. So there is tons of information. So I shared a lot of resources with them. So if you look at some of the resources that were provided by 59 Days of Code, AWWA's website, the Bureau's website, you can find information. The Bureau, there's a lot of these entities that keep data on what are the levels of the lake, what is the current flow out of the certain dams. You can also find data. You can talk to some of the universities. In fact, Fresno State is working on a program to create a water nexus, and basically what it is it's a GIS database map. It's done through the library is actually the one that's working on it, and I'm not sure what level where they're at in terms of developing it, but the intention of it was to pull data, all things water, to a single map, so that you could start to browse that map and say, I want to find out about a certain thing, and then it would bring up all of the resources and sources for data on that particular topic. So some of the university institutions, Berkeley, Fresno State, Davis, you can get a lot of information from the universities as well as professional organizations, which are listed in the 59 Days of Code. A lot of the larger municipalities, they produce annual reports, and their annual reports will have a lot of the data that we were talking about earlier. So you can go to Metropolitan Water Resource, the Metropolitan Water District. Thanks, Met. You can go to San Diego's Water District. You can go to they have a great annual report. So a lot of the larger water districts and even some of the irrigation districts produce really good annual reports that have a lot of data in it. And then all of the municipalities have to report their data annually to the State Water Resources Control Board Office of Drinking Water. And so there's a ton of data that can be mined from the State Office of Drinking Water, their website as well.
So on the
municipal
website,
water.
My Water Quality, you can data mine the heck out of it. It'll show you which systems, what kind of water quality they're serving, what systems are in non-compliance and where they are, all map-based, with little stars all over the state of California.
And I believe I did give that website also. So a lot of these websites I'm telling you about are here. I didn't list the universities. I should have thought about that and given that to you, given that as well. But there's a lot of universities that you can get information and data from as well. And I'll be if you have questions, you're trying to find some data, don't know where to find it, don't know where to look. If you send that question through 59 Days of Code, they can communicate with us, and we can try and point you in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you. And just a note, 59 Days of Code has put out a PDF. If you want to go find that PDF, it has 11 pages and it has a lot of the resources that we've been mentioning. If you go to 2017.59daysofcode.org/water, you'll find that PDF with more information. And so if you need that URL, you can come to me afterwards. Let's give it up for the panel for taking their time out. Thank you.